Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Laura with Connect My Brain. Thanks so much for tuning in. This podcast is going to focus today on looking at handwriting and how we can look at our developmental milestones and begin to understand the process of how we learn that we will actually use our hands into a fine motor skill such as handwriting. That's one of the common complaints that parents have when they're looking at their child's progress. How are they doing in school? And many times, what I hear is my child's handwriting is terrible. Well, this too is a developmental sequence. Now, what I want you to do when you have an opportunity is to make sure you go watch the video. There's going to be a couple of documents that I want to share today. And for the podcast audience, I'll use lots of description, but I really want you to see what I'm showing, especially with a handwriting sample. In addition, you can go over to the website, connectmybrain.com, go over to the podcast tab and click on one of the podcasts, and you will see this very document, Dr. Laura's Guide to Developmental Milestone. This is a free document to you that you can just put in your information, and we will be happy to send it to you. So it is not a complete document because this is only 4 pages. So what I've done is I've tried to condense it down so that you could get the highlights, but there are so many milestones, and milestones actually go on for many years. So even beyond college years, the idea of graduating from college or entering into your first career, getting married, having children, all of those are considered milestones. Okay. But let's focus today primarily on handwriting. So as we get started, I'm going to go back and forth between the guide, the developmental milestone guide, as well as a sample of a handwriting that I acquired during one of the assessments that I took. So let's first look at the handwriting. So what I want you to see is the instruction is show me the middle of the page. And that's why there is a dot in the middle of the page. So I take a piece of paper, there's no lines on the paper, and I ask the child to put a dot in the middle. I don't want the child to have the benefit of the top margin or bottom margin because there's many things that are going on that I want to see during their handwriting sample. So we get down here in the middle and we can see that this particular line of alphabet, and that's what I asked. I said, I want you to write the alphabet for me. I don't care if it's uppercase or lowercase, but I want you to go all the way across the page. So what you see, if you have an opportunity to go over and look at the YouTube, I'll say it out loud. The line of print has a little bit of an upward slope, but you can tell that when I get to that midpoint where he made a little mark, it was able to bring the letter back down and then went to the end. Now, this child is 7 years old, and the line of print reads A, B, C, D, H, I, J, K, L, M, O, P, W, X, Y, and A, N, D, Z. So now let's go back to our developmental milestones and take a look at how handwriting is actually influenced through those developmental milestones. Okay, so what I highlighted in my little picture was I can go all the way back to newborn to the first year. So if you look at this document under gross motor, I want to highlight at 6 months, the head and shoulder are supported by the arms. I even want to call to mind the picture of the little one off to the right hand side of the page that is crawling. So, crawling literally is the beginning of putting the weight in the hands and being able to begin to shape how gross motor is going to turn to fine motor. So when we crawl, we literally are up more on our fingertips than the flatness of our palm. So we are developing an arch in our hand. So for my podcast audience, I'm literally holding up my hand. And if I just kind of curve it around right in here, right in the palm of the hand, it's not flat, it has an arch. So all the way back to the beginning of starting to put the weight into your hands will eventually influence the ability to hold a writing instrument. Even at birth, we have the grasp reflex. And this is when you place your hand with your baby's finger right in the middle of your hand. Or no, I'm sorry. You put your finger in the middle of your baby's hand and the baby automatically squeezes it. So it's the action of starting to grab something. Now, this is not just meant for handwriting. It's also meant that the baby will have activity early on in the hand so that the baby will feed itself. Okay. But I'm always trying to help parents understand that everything we do is a sequence of events. And so if we can go back in a timeline, and if a child had an absent reflex for the grasp, that would be a very serious one, but I have seen it. Or the child did not crawl long enough, or had an atypical posture to their crawl. So the posture is meant to be on the hands and knees. We're not meant to be up on our hands and toes, and we're not meant to be up on our bottoms scooting along. Now, remember the things that I've taught in the past. We have 5 different categories of development. We have fine motor, gross motor, social communication, and adaptation. Adaptation is what's happening when we see an atypical crawl, meaning something is innately holding that child from getting into the hands and the knees. And that needs to be the first red flag. Remember, the earlier that we get into these types of developmental milestones and begin to guide and influence and teach parents little things, strategies that they can do, this will begin to disrupt a pattern of where development may not be going in the right direction. So, for one example, I had a little girl, a very big little baby, but what was going on was she wasn't able to really hold herself up, and she was actually demonstrating low tone. So we used chiropractic adjustments, cranial work, and kinesiotape. How about that? And really started to strengthen her erector spinae muscles, the muscles that run along the spine. And within a couple of weeks, this little one was crawling along. Now, doesn't mean every single case goes that quickly, but the point is when you are able to get in early, you have the best chance at turning the situation around. Now, I do want you to notice things like communication on the developmental milestones. This is very important. Now, I know we're focused on handwriting right now, but what I really want you to understand, again, every part of these categories have a developmental sequence. At 7 weeks, making cooing sounds, these are actually acquiring the sound of vowels. And then at 5 months, we've got a single syllable word. And at 8 months, we've got a double syllable word. And at 12 months, 2 or 3 words. Now, I will tell you this, little ones understand a whole lot more than what we give them credit for. Okay, so let's move down. So when we get into 2 years and up, what part of the gross motor is going to influence handwriting? Well, one of the things that they're always seeing is, can a child stack a bunch of blocks? Okay, so being able to build a tower of blocks will certainly influence your ability to hold a writing instrument in your hand. Okay, so now let's look at 4 and 5-year-olds. So we're going to come down here. They're starting to get more communication and language, more developmental motor skills. And then when we get into 6 years and up, we now, in our fine motor category, we should have our dominant hand. We should be in our tripod grasp. We should have small finger movements, and we should be able to use scissors correctly. So the point to this is that when we are thinking about something that may not be going the direction that we would like to see, like handwriting, I really want you to step back and say to yourself, this is not, I don't want to write. This isn't, I can't write. This is more, perhaps the sequence of development was interrupted, and this is now the pattern that I'm displaying. And when I also look at the handwriting, I'm videoing how that child is writing. And that particular child, the writing hand is still wrapped around the pencil. So for the podcast audience, I've got my hand up and I'm actually showing how the child still wrapped their hand around the pencil versus holding it in a tripod. Okay. So it's so important to understand how every one of these pieces are building on each other. Okay. So I went through and I showed you some stuff about writing, but let's take a little deeper look, because the other part that I really want to help parents understand is that we can't just pull out one piece of one of the categories of development, like fine motor and writing, and not be able to connect the dots with all the other things that can potentially be going on. So we saw the list, and I'm going to go back to that picture in just a minute. But what I want to highlight is that the head at 4 weeks is really the earliest part, is dominating the control over what the rest of the body is doing. So in addition to how the pencil was held, this child was actually holding their head in their hand while they were writing. And then when we actually looked at some primitive reflexes, we found that they still had an asymmetrical tonic neck reflex, which was literally splitting both sides of the body in separate columns, making it incredibly difficult for things to cross the midline. Okay, so let's go back for a second to our picture of the handwriting. And what I want, let me put this up on share. Okay, let me do it this way. Okay, I'm going to stop share this way, go back and pull that window up. Here we go. Okay, so now you can see the handwriting. Okay, so what you see here is let's pull this apart, because if I can help you understand that it's more than just handwriting, it will open up such a window for understanding development in children. Okay, so we identified some developmental milestones associated, just a few, and these aren't all of them. But let's go back now and look at the letters. So for the podcast audience, again, the handwriting begins in the center of the page, and then it has a upward slope. So this means that my eyes are not teaming together, and literally I'm functioning with two different columns of brain function. And as I come to the midline, I'm using the point I made as a reference point. So for kids, this is strategies. They are constantly looking for strategies to help them. Always remember, children do not have a point of reference. They don't know how to go and tell somebody yet. Hey, when I try to write, I have to look for things to help me know where my hand is, where my pencil is, and with what I'm actually writing down. And this same child, when we were doing what's called interactive metronome testing, which is a therapy in and of itself, but we are looking at the timing between both sides of the brain. They hear a bell, and then using both hands, they are clapping, and we're able to get data immediately from each assessment that we do. How accurate are you to bring your body together with the sound that you hear? Okay. So when this child was doing that particular assessment, they were actually looking around and found the little box that the metronome has all of its wires coming out to then project onto your computer monitor. But when the bell's going off, it actually has a little flash of light. So this child was looking for that strategy. Okay. Keep that in mind. This child was looking for the strategy to get them back on track. Now, that's very much quite a high level of intuitiveness at 7 years old. So at 7 years old, if I can find cues in my environment that are going to help me complete a task, then I'm going to use them. But those strategies are coming under that category of adaptation. And I'm adapting, but it's coming at a cost. I can't do this for myself. I can't do this at an expected age level. But if I find things in my environment, they're helping me finish, whether I'm finishing it well or not. And meanwhile, we're getting this kind of outcome of their work, and they're continuing down a path. They're getting put into the next level of school, and maybe 3 or 4 different kinds of tutors. And there's a level of exhaustion that is then going to hit this child. Now, again, let me go over what letters were actually put down on the piece of paper. And as I read this to you, what's missing, right? And what is happening to this individual's learning? So here's the list: A, B, C, D, H, I, J, K, L, M, O, P, W, X, Y, Z, literally spelled out A-N-D and the letter Z. 7 years old, you should know your alphabet. You should have already dropped the and Z, but there are big chunks of the letters missing both at the beginning and in the middle. They got, well, we'll say more like beginning, like maybe a third into it. They got the beginning, the ABC, the W, X, Y, Z. But the part in the middle is not accurate. So this is really where this child is. Now, let's stack this up. So we realize what we're getting with handwriting, we're getting the outcome. We're seeing what's happening on the inside and how it's coming out in their ability to learn. So it's not just the alphabet. It's not just math. It's not just reading. It's how I got wired up. And nobody picked up on something well enough to realize that I am putting things together, but it's not accurate. And if we don't put a stop to this inflexibility, this will completely impact this child's quality of life, what they're supposed to be and become in the world. In the previous podcast, I talked about hopeful versus hopeless. And one thing that happens, and I'm just going to use this one as an example, but this could be the example of somebody saying this child's handwriting is not that great. They don't even know their alphabet. And the child is being bathed in this information and losing their confidence, losing their drive, their motivation, their love of learning. Children should innately love to learn. They're sponges. Everything is opening up, and they should have that experience. But when something isn't wired together like it's supposed to be, we get the outcome. This child is looking for strategies to help them along. This child also, and we've definitely talked about lateralization before, but that's another issue that was found in the assessment. So if you just happen to get this podcast and you have no idea what lateralization is, let me explain it briefly. But what it is it's the outcome of the developmental sequence of when we did innately act like two sides, laying down the specialty centers of our brain. Gross motor is on the right, fine motor is on the left, happiness is on the left, sadness is on the right. But when we go through what's called neurological pruning, losing the neurons that we did not practice, keeping the neurons that we practiced the most. And this pruning starts in the womb and it continues for many years once that child is born and going through the acquisition of their developmental milestones. Around 3 or 4 years of age, closer to 4, a child is going to start to declare their dominance. And this is where we begin to see, this is where the communication is being driven on both sides. The practice of the information being driven to both sides happens when we crawl. That's why it's imperative that we crawl. And changing developmental milestones is just not acceptable. The longer we wait, the harder it is to help somebody get back on track. Lateralization is the dominance of the eye, ear, hand, and foot, and it should all be on one side. Again, it's the outcome of a huge neurological sequence. And the brain is showing us how well we got organized. And just because we go through the pruning process, it is not a guarantee that all of the practice that went on was accurate. So, this is why it's imperative that we look at a developmental assessment. In fact, in the autistic population, that is one of the big areas that research has identified, is that it doesn't appear that children that have regressed into autism pruned correctly. So, what that would mean is that they have excess neurons. And so there is lack of efficiency in the brain. But this was something that you are innately designed to do. And if it can be identified early, if we can look at all the categories of how we get wired, the mechanical part, the chemical part, the brain part, we have the best opportunity of sliding that domino back into place and allowing that child to move forward. The earlier you get your child assessed, the greater it is, the easier it is. So what is that time frame? I like to ask people to do this before. If you had any suspicion when your child was a baby, they didn't crawl, that's enough for me. If they talked late, that's enough for me. If they were always crying or holding their hands over their ears, that's enough for me. If they're emotionally dysregulated, that's enough for me. If you already are getting reports in pre-K and kindergarten, that is more than enough. But the longer you wait, the harder it is. It's not that it can't be done, but we've got to be ready then to really roll up our sleeves. The first 7.5 years are paramount in child development. And then from 7.5 to 8.5 is when there's a huge maturation at the higher brain. So again, the earlier we get into this, the easier it is for everybody. So I hope what I've been able to demonstrate is you can't just look at one element. You can't just hear your child is having trouble reading. I'm working on a case with that right now. And absolutely, the child is having problems reading. But what do you need to read? You need your eyes, right? And the sequence of eye development is so vast. In fact, we'll do a podcast on it so that you can hear it. But it is so important to understand your vision was already starting in the womb. And then when you came out, you saw 2400. Within 10 weeks, you were acquiring adult vision. 10 weeks of life. Can you imagine the amount of wiring and firing that was going on at that time? So if we can look at eye movement, so there's two parts. There's visual acuity, like can you actually see? And then it's oculomotor, the muscles wrapped around the eyeballs. We have a piece of equipment here called right eye, and it literally will measure how your eyes move. This one little guy came in, parents just thought he was lazy, thought, he just won't even try. We did an eye test on him. The poor kid couldn't even control his eyeballs. He has gone through this program beautifully, and he's graduating on time. There is so much to the sequence of development. But if you have a problem and all you do is you come in at the same level, like with reading and tutors, and you don't fix the problem, you'll get a little bit of change. It's kind of like going to the gym and working your bicep. As long as I'm doing it, I'm going to get a little bit of change. And no offense to any tutor or any other program, but if you don't get back to the root cause, What is it for that child? What fired together? What's happening now as a result of it? And that is the outcome. That is losing the middle of my alphabet. That is not being able to find a line of print. That is avoiding any kind of movement. That's being even a picky eater. All this stuff is one layer over another layer. This is a great time. It's summertime. This is a great time to get your child a developmental assessment. This is not a psycho analysis. This is not one that's going to give you that type of documentation for a school. This is a functional assessment. What can my child actually do? Did my child follow the typical developmental milestone acquisition? Did I have any red flags in my pregnancy? Is there anything else that's going on right now that we can match it up, connect the dots so that we can see? If those points are there, this is the assessment for your child. Summer is a great time. It's a snapshot in time. We've only got a few spots left for the summer. We do not load this place up. We want children to get the attention. We want them to come in with a high frequency and high intensity. We love the summer clan because they're going to go back to school and the school is going to be dazzled. If your child is struggling, start with just a phone call. Give me a call, 678-501-5172. I am happy to schedule a time with you and just chat. You can also send information into the website. Let me know when you're available and we can schedule a time to chat. And I will let you know if we are a good fit for you and if you're a good fit for us, because that's really what it's about. Will we have the tools to turn this thing around for your child and your family? Make this your last stop and move your child forward with greatest of ease. Well, I hope you got some pearls. I hope you share this with someone. Go over to the website, download Dr. Hansen's Guide to Developmental Milestones. Look at that and start to reflect on your own child's development. If you see some of those points that you know in your gut they didn't do, typically didn't do long enough, didn't ever do, reach out. The time is now. Be blessed.